So yeah.
Welcome to the Sleep Experience podcast, where we take a deep dive into the latest sleep hacks, gadgets, and strategies to skyrocket your productivity to new heights. Being a high performer is all about resting at 100%, so you can execute at 100%.
Side effects of medication, they weren't doing anything for me, so I felt like my back was up against the wall.
Hey, this is Riley, host of the Sleep Experience podcast. At the Sleep Experience podcast, we interview health experts and teach our community how upgrading their sleep is the one thing that they need to unlock their biological code and maximize their performance in an effortless way by doing more with less. Do you want to become a productivity machine, have genius ideas automatically pop into your mind, stop feeling so stressed, build better relationships, and generate more income? Optimizing your deep sleep can do just that. Visit www.thesleepconsultant.com to learn more. My guest today is Chris Kresser. Chris is the co-founder of the California Center for Functional Medicine, the founder of the Kresser Institute, and host of the top-ranked Health Revolution Health Radio, the creator of chriskresser.com, and the New York Times bestselling author of The Paleo Cure and Unconventional Medicine. He is one of the most respected clinicians and educators in the fields of functional medicine and ancestral health, and has trained over 2,000 clinicians and health coaches from 50-plus countries with his unique approach. Chris was named one of the 100 most influential people in health and fitness by greatlist.com and has appeared as a featured guest on Dr. Oz, Time, The Atlantic, NPR, Fox and Friends, and other national media outlets. He lives in Bend, Oregon with his wife and his daughter. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Riley. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you on, especially someone else who has a functional medicine background. It's just something that I've been in the weeds for almost 10 years now myself. So I'm really excited to dive in. The one thing I really like asking, people with medical or health backgrounds is, what is your overall philosophy on achieving better health and peak performance? I know it's a very broad question, but you approach it from, I guess, a root cause versus more just looking at the symptoms. How do you see it?
Yeah, I look at it in terms of a series of concentric circles. So, for the most important thing is diet and lifestyle for the vast majority of people, which includes sleep, of course, but also, if we look at 4 pillars, for me, there would be nutrition, sleep, stress management, and physical activity. And then, we can layer on other things like time outdoors, connection with nature, social connections, pleasure and fun, all of which are really important as well. So that's maybe another ring out from the concentric circle. And if things are going well, and you're feeling great and thriving within that template, then, you might never hear about functional medicine or need to know about it. But of course, for many people, something goes wrong eventually, for any number of reasons, despite our best efforts. And that's, when you have a particular issue that you need help with, that's when, functional medicine and that perspective becomes useful. And as you pointed out, the main difference between that paradigm and the conventional medical paradigm is that the conventional medical paradigm is mostly oriented around suppressing symptoms with drugs or surgery in some cases, which rarely addresses the root cause of the problem. And, certainly there's a time and a place in some cases for medication and addressing symptoms and giving people relief is necessary and helpful, but it shouldn't be the starting place. And it should be something that is done in conjunction with, at the very least, a more root cause approach, which is looking to discover first and then treat the underlying causes of the problem. And that's what I've spent my whole career focused on. And, nothing has changed over my 15-year career to convince me that that's not the best approach. Quite the contrary. It's just, my belief in that has just deepened over time.
I can imagine. I mean, especially when it comes to sleep, there's so many people, executive CEOs, who are on, a lot of sleeping pills, and they wake up totally exhausted or they can't sleep without it. And then they use coffee as another Band-Aid on the problem to try and get through. And it's just a deep rabbit hole that people can go down. What have you seen, specifically with sleep, in your opinion? Why is it so important? And what happens when we don't get enough of it?
I mean, just from a 30,000 foot view perspective, it's incredibly important because it's where our body restores and rejuvenates itself. And this is true not just for humans, it's true for pretty much every animal. And organism has some sort of restorative, regenerative process that happens. And it happens differently in different animals and different organisms, but it's universal in nature. And um, if you study traditional cultures and even Western culture prior to the Industrial Revolution, the average was, 7 to 8 hours of high quality sleep per night. And, there were perhaps, and still are some cultures where that breaks out a little differently. Maybe they go to bed when the sun goes down.
Yeah.
And then they might have a period during the early morning hours, like 2 a.m., where they wake up but they're not getting up and checking their email. They're getting up and maybe staring at the stars and having some contemplative time and rest time, and then falling back asleep. But if you add up the amount of sleep, it's still in that 7 to 8 hour range of high quality sleep. So, we now know that the consequences of this, of not getting that amount of high quality sleep. And of course, there are edge cases of people who need less and people who need more. We can get into that later if you want, but the consequences span every system and tissue in the body. Everything from not just, our brain health, our mood, our cognitive function, which I think is one of the most noticeable and immediate impacts of sleep deprivation. And the interesting thing about it is when they've done studies and they ask people subjectively if their cognition or motor skills or anything are impaired, people tend to say no, because we very quickly adapt to our new normal. But when they do objective tests to measure those things, they're hugely impaired. They're impaired, like to the extent that if someone had had several drinks of alcohol and they were way above the blood alcohol limit, and yet they're still reporting subjectively that they're fine. There's no difference. So that's a big one. But then, cardiovascular implications, huge metabolic implications, like insulin resistance can happen after just one night of sleep deprivation. It doesn't mean it becomes permanent, but judgment around food. This is a big one. Like, people can make worse choices about food even after one night of sleep deprivation. It affects blood sugar. It affects cortisol levels, male and female hormone production. Digestion is a huge one because smooth digestion relies on an activated, parasympathetic rest and digest response. And if your cortisol levels are up because of sleep deprivation, that's going to interfere. I mean, we could go on. It's really sort of no system of the body is not impacted by it. So I have come to believe over the course of my career that in some cases, when a patient comes to me, if their diet is a mess and their sleep is a mess, in some cases, I will actually focus on sleep first, because if they don't get that sorted, they're not even going to have the faculties to address their diet and improve it. They're just going to be such a mess that they won't be able to do any of the things they need to do. So I think in some cases it's the number one factor that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think that's so key. And even with a perfect diet, if you're not getting proper sleep, you're not going to be close to 100%.
Absolutely.
Is there a world where we can, there's biohacking has really become a thing over the last couple of years, even though it's been around since Steve Asprey brought it with the bulletproof coffee and everything. But can we biohack ourselves to shorter sleep? Like, can we get 6 hours of high quality sleep and make that the same as or superior to 7 to 9 hours of sleep?
I mean, not that I'm aware of. I won't say that that's impossible, because there's, we're learning a lot all the time. What I would say is that from what I've seen in the research, there is a sort of individual blueprint or thumbprint or whatever you want to call it for sleep needs. And a lot of that seems to be genetically driven.
Right.
And if you're a person who thrives with 8 hours of sleep. I'm not
Mm.
aware of an evidence-based method to shift your chronotype to be a
Yeah.
person who can thrive on 6 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Now, I think there are certainly things, just anecdotally and from some research I've seen, if you are a meditator and and you can get into a pretty deep meditative state during the day, that may somewhat reduce sleep needs. I certainly, I'm a longtime meditator myself, and I've done on meditation retreats where I'm doing, 8+ hours of meditation a day.
Hmm.
I sleep less. There's
Yeah.
absolutely no doubt about that.
Sure.
And so, but I don't know how that translates into a normal day-to-day
Yeah.
routine,
Yeah.
with just like a half hour, an hour meditation.
Yeah. Completely makes sense. How about, for improving sleep? A lot of people know, like everyone who's sort of aware of sleep has read Matthew Walker's book Why We Sleep. And so, dark bedroom environment, making sure it's cool, not eating before bedtime, making sure we, expose our eyes to the sunlight when we wake up. These are all very important for our sleep and our energy, circadian rhythm, and things like that. But sometimes I work with people and they do all these things, but they're still experiencing, maybe they get to 70% or 80%, but they're just not quite at 70% or 100%. And so in their cases, sometimes we have to get a little bit more advanced. Are you familiar? I'm sure you see people's tests. You look at their gut, you look at their thyroid, different areas of the body. When you, I guess there's that tier one where you go through all those basic fundamentals, but then you have to go deeper with people if you want to go further down performance. Could you talk a little bit about maybe different systems of the body, whether it's the gut or the thyroid, maybe why people wouldn't be sleeping as best they could?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if we've done all the basics and they're still not sleeping, I mean,
Mm.
one thing I want to emphasize is that managing stress is easier said than done.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say, "Oh, I've got the basics down," and then I find out that they're just like running around like a chicken with their head cut off all day, like
Yeah.
super stressed entrepreneur type, burning the candle at both ends. They're using their
Yeah.
phone like right up until they go to bed. They're
Oh,
sleeping with
yeah.
their phone in their bedroom, like
Yeah.
that's not actually taking care of the basics in my mind. No
Yeah.
matter how good your diet and your physical activity is.
Mhm.
But let's say someone truly is doing all of those things and they're taking care of their sleep hygiene. They're not using screens at night. They're doing all the other things that you mentioned, and they're still struggling. Looking for any kind of inflammatory condition is going to be a big priority on the list, because we know that inflammation can disrupt sleep in so many different ways. So any kind of chronic inflammatory condition, autoimmune, musculoskeletal, gut related problem that's driving inflammation will be a big priority. Thyroid, you
Okay.
mentioned, is really important.
Mhm.
Both hypo and hyperthyroidism can interfere with sleep in a number of different ways. Male and female hormone imbalances. So for
Mhm.
men, low testosterone; for women, low estrogen and or progesterone, or in some cases high, although that's less common.
Mhm.
Gut disorders for sure, because if you have a GI issue like SIBO or microbial dysbiosis or undetected parasite or fungal infection or something like that, your body's chronically activated in a sympathetic nervous system response, because the
Mm.
gut is just part of the nervous system, an extension of the nervous system. And just the people being in pain and discomfort in
Yeah.
their gut is definitely gonna interfere with sleep. Certainly this is pretty obvious, but any other musculoskeletal condition that's causing pain and
Yeah.
discomfort and making it harder to sleep is really important. Then we start, I would say, like another level down, we start to get into things like heavy metal
Mm.
toxicity or mold or mold or other biotoxins that people encounter in their home can be hugely disruptive to sleep, because they really impact the nervous system more than anything else.
Yeah.
Nutrient deficiencies are a big one. even and quite common even on with people who are following a nutrient dense whole foods healthy diet. That's a huge one that we screen for in practice, because all of the neurotransmitters that promote healthy sleep and hormones like melatonin have nutrient precursors that are required for optimization of that hormonal pathway. So those are the biggest ones that come to mind for me.
Yeah, that's super insightful. And if people want to go get all this stuff tested, they go to their conventional doctor, they might run a blood test. Their thyroid might just be TSH, or they'll be lucky if they can try and get, well, at least in Canada, it's very difficult to get certain things screened for. So what kind of testing should people look for to get all the tough stuff tested that you just mentioned?
Yeah, it's really hard for Canadian folks and also the UK. You know, I train doctors all around the world, and I hear a lot about the difficulties, particularly in the UK, Europe, and Canada. But it's also challenging in the US. I mean, there are more options, there's more availability of the test, but of course, in many cases you have to pay out of pocket, which can be challenging because some of these tests are not cheap. But I would say, you know, the very basic things would be get as much of as comprehensive of a blood panel that your practitioner will order for you and that your insurance will cover. So this would include a blood sugar panel. So, you know, ideally you get fasting glucose, hemoglobin A1C. You could look at, you know, triglycerides on the lipid panel, fasting insulin, and then you can either get like a continuous glucose monitor through like a company like Levels, or even just buy a glucometer and do some post-meal blood sugar testing. What you're looking for there is any significant blood sugar drops at night in particular, because what will happen is, if that does happen, which is common in like reactive hypoglycemia and early stage, you know, pre-diabetes or diabetes progressing towards diabetes, is a phase called reactive hypoglycemia, where your blood sugar goes up more than it should after a meal. And then you get a big release of insulin to deal with that, which then plummets your blood sugar. And if that happens at night, cortisol will actually, for adrenaline, epinephrine and cortisol will be secreted to bring your blood sugar back up. That's actually the primary role of cortisol from an evolutionary perspective. Is because, you know, in our ancestral environment, we had periods of food scarcity where we weren't eating and our blood sugar would drop. Cortisol would be secreted to bring it back up and stabilize it, because you can die from low blood sugar in minutes if it drops low enough, whereas it takes decades to die from high blood sugar. So our body has all these mechanisms for protecting us from low blood sugar drops, but those mechanisms actually are stimulating. So if that's happening during night time, which I've seen over and over in my practice, then correcting blood sugar, you know, that which can mean a lower carb diet, higher protein intake, all the other things that, you know, we do for that, can actually have a profound impact on sleep. So you want to get that blood sugar panel, and you want to get a thyroid panel. Again, ideally it would be TSH, total T4, total T3, free T4, and free T3, not just TSH. And sometimes if you push for that, they will do it. It's not always successful, but it's worth trying. Then I would say as many nutrients as you can get: magnesium, B12, folate, B6, vitamin D. If you can get some of the other vitamins and minerals, that would be awesome too. But what you're looking for there is any kind of methylation issue. So if you have, you know, your folate or B12 are low, for example, that can cause methylation problems, which can in turn, you know, lead to overstimulation in the nervous system and interfere with sleep. Iron deficiency. So a full iron panel. Iron deficiency can contribute to poor sleep because you're not getting enough oxygen to your cells, including your brain cells. And as you can imagine, I mean, the brain, it needs some source of energy, ketones or or carbohydrate, and it needs oxygen. Those are really the two main things. So if you're not getting enough oxygen, that's definitely going to interfere with sleep. So from a blood panel perspective, that's a really good starting place. And if you're really lucky, you might be able to get some hormones thrown in to that panel too. So, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, those are a little trickier and more involved to test because, of course, for menstruating women, hormones are produced cyclically throughout the month. So just getting a single reading during the month is of limited value because of that fluctuation. Whereas for men and for women who are already in menopause, it's a little more straightforward. You can just get the one test and that should be fine. Beyond that, it would depend on the symptoms and the presentation. So for example, if somebody has got GI symptoms, then we're going to do a SIBO breath test. We're going to do a stool test. We might do urine organic acids or something like that. If someone already knows they have an autoimmune condition, we're going to do some tests for inflammatory markers to see and antibodies to see what's happening there and where we might need to intervene. So it's, it starts to become more personalized after that basic panel.
Yeah. I love that, Chris. It's really well detailed. Do the low-hanging fruit, what you can do. So you can do first, and then you can go more advanced. You don't have to go super advanced right away, but like you said, it's all based on the presentation. What about, tracking subjective biometrics, biomarkers with, trackable wearables like an Oura Ring or a Whoop? Do you have a favorite, or are they all kind of the same? Do you have a stance on that?
I like Oura and Whoop, and even Apple Watch now has improved over time, has some useful features. My take on those is they can be very useful initially when people are just kind of new to establishing connections between diet and lifestyle patterns and their sleep. For example, we do at CCFM, my clinic, we've done programs with first responders like Berkeley Fire Department when I was still there in the Bay Area. And these first responders have it rough when it comes to sleep and circadian rhythm. They work night shifts. And even worse, they work irregular shifts. So they'll have like 3 days a week on the night shift, and then they'll work a regular day shift. And in that scenario, it's almost impossible for the body to adapt. It would be better if they just only did night shifts. Then at some point their body has a chance to adapt. But of course, that's really hard on families, and people don't really want that, which is understandable. So, but in a lot of cases, these people didn't necessarily have a clear understanding of how things that they were doing in their life impacted their sleep. And so, for example, it was really interesting and helpful for them to see, oh, wait, I had a couple beers last night, and it totally destroyed my deep sleep. Like I got no deep sleep last night. Whereas a night before that, I didn't drink and I actually got pretty good deep sleep. Or look what happened. I ate a super late meal. I was out, with friends, and that interfered with my sleep. And if I eat earlier, then it didn't. And so those insights are really valuable, but I think there's a law of diminishing returns there, where once you gain those insights and have a pretty clear understanding of how your behaviors impact your sleep, there's not as much of a need, in my experience, to continue wearing them.
Got it.
So I think they can fill a very important function and role, but maybe not necessary forever.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Any last words of wisdom today, Chris, before we close things off?
I always encourage people to go back to the basics. It's so easy. And look, if you came to my house, you would see like a chili pad or Uller on my bed. You cool the sleeping surface. I go in the sauna, I cold plunge, I do all those things. But one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in my 15-year clinical practice, because I do work with a lot of high-level athletes, entrepreneurs, high performers, and other fields, is going right to those things and skipping the basics, thinking that we can sort of biohack ourselves out of a terrible diet and lifestyle. And it just never works. I would far rather see someone invest their time and energy in really dialing in the basics. And then, sure, from there, continue on to optimization. I love that. But don't skip the basics and go straight to optimization, because it doesn't work.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much today, Chris. I got a lot of insights, and I'm sure our audience did too. So I appreciate your time today. If people want to learn more about you, where can they visit?
ChrisKresser.com is my website with all the free resources, ebooks, etc. And then I have a supplement line at adaptnaturals.com.
Perfect. So we'll put all that down in the show notes below for people to access, and we'll leave it there for people to view as well. All right, guys, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to learn more about how sleep can benefit your personal business life, visit. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Sleep Experience podcast. We'll see you next time on next week's episode. Be sure to subscribe and follow us to get future updates on everything sleep, energy, focus, stress, and better performance.